All right. So today we're going to look at the differences between the House and the Senate and Congress. Um, and there's a lot. There's structural ones, and then there's in terms of function and a variety of different things. And one of the things that I've seen the AP test do a lot is actually ask students to kind of articulate the differences between the House and the Senate. And also just kind of detail some of the various powers that aren't necessarily apparent. But we'll start with the basics. So we have the House, and we have the Senate. All right, first, the easy stuff. The House, let's start with Senate. It's 2 per state, which gives us 50 states, 100 total. All right, in the House, there are actually, it's proportional to the population. So a state like California, which is very populous, has 53 members of the House. And a state like Alaska has 1. But in total, there are 435 members. Okay? All right. So members of the House serve for 2-year terms. That means in every even year, 2020, 2022, and so on like that, the entire House is up for re-election. So in this November, it's entirely possible you could get 435 new members of the House. That's not likely, but it's possible. In the Senate, it is a 6-year term. And it's one third every 2 years. So it's 33, 33, and then 34. So at any given time, the Senate only has 33 seats up, and like in some years, that's an advantage for Democrats, some years advantage for Republicans, depending on who's up for re-election. Like this year, Mitch McConnell's up for re-election. So is Doug Jones in Alabama. Anyway, okay, so now on to some of the powers that they have individually that are significant. Congress, the House, and when we say Congress, like when we're talking about a congressperson, it's generally the House. Senators are senators, Senate, whatever. Anyway, in the House, their exclusive power, the main exclusive power is that they have the power to tax. All bills for raising revenue must originate in the House. That's in the Constitution. So the Senate can't create a budget, and they can't create taxes. That happens in the House. Now, the Senate can create them, but they have to send them to the House for the House to actually officially create it. Or they sit around and wait for the House to send them one. And since every year's budget has the tax code as part of it, that's a pretty important power of the House. But what the Senate has is what's called advice and consent. This is a really big one. You've probably heard it as confirmations. Any presidential appointment to any federal job, whether that be any of the Secretary of State, Defense, Treasury, all of them, as well as Supreme Court justices, heads of things like the EPA, federal judges that are not in the Supreme Court, but rather federal, like circuit court judges. The president appoints all those people, but the Senate confirms. So, for example, when the president wants to appoint a new Secretary of State, which most presidents have had several secretaries of state. That's not uncommon. That name, once the president appoints, has to go to the Senate. The Senate holds a hearing and a confirmation and so on and so forth, and then they take a vote. And they have to vote in favor of that candidate for that candidate to actually be placed. The most recent Supreme Court justice, as of the making of this video, was Brett Kavanaugh, and I'm sure you remember if you paid at all any attention to what was going on. The Senate confirmation process was fairly lengthy and contentious. There was yelling, screaming, crying. It was great drama. Not really great for America, but they have that power, and that's really important. And the House doesn't really have any sort of involvement in that. So that's, if you want to stop the president from doing a lot of what the president wants to do, the Senate is the place to do it. even though the Democrats control the House right now, if there was a Supreme Court vacancy, the Democrats in the House can't do anything about it. It would be President Trump appointing whoever they want, and the Senate, which is controlled by Republicans as of the making of this video, would confirm that. There'd be a hearing. It'd be probably awful, but they'd confirm it. So that's important. In the House, another power that the House has is impeachment. And we all saw that this year. Now, impeachment is not removing a president from office. Trump was impeached. Clinton was impeached. Andrew Johnson was impeached. None of them were removed from office. Impeachment is a process by which the House essentially accuses the president of committing high crimes and misdemeanors, is actually what the Constitution says. And so that could be, in the case of Trump, there was obstruction of justice and so on and so forth. In the case of Clinton, it was perjury. He lied under oath, and so on. And in the case of Andrew Johnson, it was breaking a federal law of violating the Tenure of Office Act, which, whatever, we're not going to go into that one right now. So the House actually impeaches. Once the articles of impeachment are voted on, the president's impeached. Nothing can be done about that. Donald Trump was impeached. Bill Clinton was impeached. Then it goes to the Senate for a trial. The trial is determined whether or not the president gets removed from office. So they try impeachment. And in all three cases, they acquitted, which means they found not guilty. Structurally, again, a few other things that are kind of different between the House and the Senate. The House has way more rules. They have rules for everything. A lot of it has to do with this. There's 435 members, and they all represent their own constituencies, which are fairly narrow in their desires. And so you get a lot of people in Congress who are trying to do their own thing. And there's a lot of them. And so there needs to be just more rules. There's rules about how long a bill can be discussed for, who's going to, how long somebody gets to talk. And in the individual, like if somebody gets up to talk about a bill, what kinds of amendments can be offered. The length of time in which the bill is under debate before it goes to vote, and all those other things. The Senate has few, if any, rules, which actually leads to the next point, which is something called a filibuster. The Senate has it, and the House doesn't. I'm not going to go into a whole video on the filibuster or anything like that, but in short, the filibuster is if a senator rises to speak on a bill, they keep talking until they're done, until they yield the floor. Since a vote is scheduled ahead of time, so say it's Friday and the vote is scheduled for 3 o'clock, if somebody filibusters for long enough, that vote gets delayed. It could be delayed a couple weeks, a couple months, whatever. It has to be rescheduled. It doesn't just happen whenever the person's done. So the filibuster is a way in which senators have kind of abused the lack of rules to delay a vote on a bill or to stop a bill from happening that they don't want, even if they know that the bill will pass if there's a vote, they're going to prevent the vote. Whereas because the House has more rules, including a rule on how long someone could talk for, that's not going to happen. Because when you rise to speak, you have a time limit. Whereas in the Senate, you don't. To go along with this, the House has something called a germaneness rule. Germane, not German, germane. Germaneness. And the Senate does not. What germane means is relevant. So, for example, if I write a bill about air pollution, any amendment added to that bill in the House has to have something to do with air pollution or at least the environment. The Senate doesn't have any such rules. So you can add an amendment to a bill that has nothing to do with the actual bill. So if we're discussing, say, a stimulus bill in response to coronavirus, and the House has this, bill that authorizes a bunch of spending and healthcare measures and things like that, any amendments have to be relevant to what's in that bill and the goal of the bill, which is to provide financial relief for affected businesses and individuals. In the Senate, you can amend the bill whatever you want. There was a time, one of the hurricanes, where the House passed a hurricane relief bill, and in the Senate, it got amended to add on amendments to allocate money to investigate fisheries off the coast of, I believe, Washington, pre-K childcare, federal spending on pre-K childcare, lots of things that had nothing to do with hurricane relief. And that ends up costing a lot of money because all those amendments end up being very expensive. More than the original bill, actually. Something like that is actually called a Christmas tree bill because everybody wants to hang their ornament on it. And the problem is that all the ornaments kind of represent the individuals. And if there's enough ornaments, the tree falls over. So there's the germaneness and then no germaneness in the Senate. When it comes to the filibuster, how this applies is when you get up to talk about a bill, you don't have to talk about that bill. And since you can keep talking until you're done, people have gotten up to filibuster and read the Betty Crocker cookbook, which is what I believe Strom Thurmond did. Ted Cruz, in filibustering the Obamacare bill, when he filibustered, he read Dr. Seuss, I believe. It had nothing to do with the bill, and it doesn't have to. In the House, that doesn't happen because they have a germaneness rule. It also means that legislation in the House ends up not being so bloated and full of what we talked about in the last video, which is pork barrel legislation. So, I mean, that doesn't mean that it doesn't have it. It's just less. And the pork barrel that's attached to House versions of bills tend to at least be germane. So if it's a bill about federal spending on water resources, then if I'm going to vote for your bill on water, something having to do with water, then I want an amendment on the bill that helps me out, but it probably has to have something to do with water. Whereas in the Senate, it could be anything I want. It could be an amendment that just gives me a big fat teddy bear for funsies. I wouldn't do that, I don't think, because I don't think that'd get me many votes. But if I really wanted a teddy bear, I can offer the amendment in exchange for a vote. So these are the main things, and both exhibit oversight, which is actually going to be committees and oversight are the next videos. But that's the general thrust of the House and the Senate and the various kind of discrepancies between them, as far as the AP test goes anyway. All right, that'll do it.